Okay, so our first major unit in grade 9 applied science is the ecology unit, sustainable ecosystems. So in this unit, we're going to be talking a lot about ecosystems. We're going to be talking about factors that affect ecosystems. We're going to talk about different components of ecosystems. And we're also going to talk a lot about human impacts, human activity, and the effects that human activity has on ecosystems, on both aquatic, so water ecosystems, and terrestrial land ecosystems. Okay, so it says here ecology. What is it? It's the study of the relationship between all the biotic and abiotic factors in the environment. So this is saying that ecology in general is the study of the relationship between all of the living and all of the non-living factors that exist within an environment and within an ecosystem. Ecosystems specifically, an area or region in which specific biotic and abiotic factors are linked. So we're going to go into biotic and abiotic in more detail in the next slide. But in general, what is an ecosystem? It's an area where a whole bunch of different living and non-living factors are linked or connected. So we have ecology, ecosystems. The components of our environment are broken down into two main subgroups. Biotic factors, which are factors in an environment created by the presence and roles of living things. So this includes all of the living things. So for example, plants, birds, fox, worms, okay? So biotic are the living factors within an environment or an ecosystem. And then we have abiotic factors, factors in an environment created by non-living things. So these are all the non-living factors within an ecosystem. So for example, wind, rain, sun, and rocks. So these factors, both living and non-living factors, interact, and a lot of these non-living factors do have major effects on the living things in an ecosystem. So this diagram here says the abiotic components of a grassland ecosystem are the non-living features of the ecosystem that the living organisms depend on. So like I was just saying on the last slide, these non-living factors do have an effect on the living things. So keeping in mind abiotic meaning non-living, biotic meaning living. So in this diagram, there's a lot going on, but you'll notice that up here, okay, so right here we have this cloud. It shows that it's raining, so we have that's an abiotic component or factor. Rain or water comes down onto this land here, joins in with the soil, and eventually comes down and runs off into this little pond that we have here. So again, water is a non-living thing that has an effect on the living, or something that the living things depend on. Are these living things, animals, all the organisms depend on having water for survival. We also have the sun here. So again, the living things depend on the sun for heat and warmth. Trees and plants depend on the sun in order to perform photosynthesis, in order for them to create food and be able to grow. Down here you'll see some organisms. And right here we have some living things there. And keeping in mind that within an ecosystem there are different food chains that are involved, and all of these different food chains create a food web, which is the connection between all of the organisms within the ecosystem. So here is just really to show that there are many different non-living abiotic factors. Again, the pond, the water, the rain, the sun, all of these non-living factors that are interacting with the living factors, the biotic factors, which include our birds and our insects and our trees and our plants and that sort of thing. So an ecosystem is the connection, the link between these two factors. Okay, so we have different spheres of the Earth. It says here, gravity of Earth holds gases near its surface. So the first sphere that we're going to discuss is the atmosphere. So what is the atmosphere? It is a layer of gases surrounding Earth extending upwards for hundreds of kilometers. The atmosphere is specifically made of nitrogen gas, which makes up 78% of the atmosphere. We also have oxygen gas, which makes up 21% of the atmosphere. And then we have a little bit left over, so less than 1% is made up of different elements like argon, water vapor, carbon dioxide, and a few others. But for the most part, the majority of the atmosphere is made up of nitrogen and oxygen gas. The atmosphere is critical for life on Earth. It acts like a blanket, which moderates surface temperatures and blocks UV rays. So if it wasn't for the atmosphere, we wouldn't have something called the greenhouse effect, which you will talk about more in grade 10 science. But we need the atmosphere to moderate the temperature on Earth. So if it wasn't for this layer of gases, the Earth would be approximately minus 18 degrees Celsius. So that would be very cold for it being the average surface temperature. So the atmosphere definitely has a very important job, and it also helps to block UV rays from the sun. Okay, the next sphere that we're going to talk about is the lithosphere. So what is it? The rocky outer shell of Earth. This includes all of the mountains, ocean floors, and all of the solid landscape that makes up the Earth, so rocks and minerals. Okay, and this can extend from 50 to 150 kilometers thick. Lastly, we have the hydrosphere. So what is the hydrosphere? All water on, above, and below Earth's surface. This includes oceans that make up 97% of the hydrosphere, as well as lakes, ice, groundwater, and clouds. So if you look over at this diagram, you'll see that the majority of the hydrosphere, 97.5% of it, is salt water. Okay, and then we have this other 2.5%, which is made up of fresh water. And if you come down here, this kind of shows you what the fresh water is broken up into. So 68.9% of that 2.5% fresh water is water locked in glaciers. About 31% is groundwater, and about 0.3% is in lakes and rivers. Okay, and then lastly, we have the biosphere. So what is that? Areas within the hydrosphere, lithosphere, and atmosphere where life can exist. So this is that area that life is supported and that life can exist. So if you think about it, we just learned that the hydrosphere is all the water. So we have a whole bunch of different organisms that can live and survive within a certain area of the hydrosphere. So fish and bunch of different marine life that can survive there. Then we have different organisms that live in the lithosphere. So remember, the lithosphere is that that rocky outer shell of the Earth. So this can include organisms that live in the soil, like worms and ants. And then we have the atmosphere, which was that layer of gases. So, you know, you could even say something like a bird is able to fly and live and survive within the atmosphere. So it's kind of like the biosphere is like the connection between the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, and the atmosphere, and it's the area where life is supported and life can exist, where organisms can survive. Okay, so now we have something here called a sustainable ecosystem. What is this? The ability to maintain an ecological balance. Most natural ecosystems are sustainable. Human activities can make a previously sustainable ecosystem to become unsustainable. So when an ecosystem is sustainable, that is when an ecosystem is growing or surviving, and that there's like this natural balance. There's homeostasis going on there, where there's a balance and the organisms within that ecosystem are surviving. Okay, there is a balance between the biotic and the abiotic factors, but sometimes ecosystems become unsustainable. Okay, they're not thriving, and a lot of this happens because of human activities. So there are many different ways, and we will talk more specifics later on in the unit, but there are many different ways that humans can interrupt or cause an ecosystem to become unsustainable. Okay, so ecological balance is maintained in a sustainable ecosystem. Okay, so we have here a couple terms. Natural ecosystem occurs naturally, not man-made. So an example would be a forest, an ocean, or a pond. Ecosystems that live within these areas. These are considered natural ecosystems. There's no interruptions, or they're not made artificially by humans. So an ecosystem, a tree in a forest is considered an ecosystem. That would be a natural ecosystem. Or if there is just, a pond, at a park near your house, that would be, considered a natural ecosystem where organisms can come and go as they please. An artificial ecosystem is artificially created and maintained by humans. And because of this, it's not usually sustainable. So again, when humans interrupt or change things of an ecosystem, this disrupts the natural balance within the ecosystem, the ecological balance. And again, that sometimes causes ecosystems to become unsustainable. So an example of artificial ecosystems include a zoo, a fish aquarium, a farm. So using a fish aquarium as a specific example, this is like a closed ecosystem. Organisms cannot come and go as they please. So again, that's the artificial part of this ecosystem. Okay, so we have natural versus artificial. Natural, naturally made, usually sustainable, more sustainable. Artificial, less likely to be sustainable on its own, okay, because of that human activity. Okay, so here we have parts of an ecosystem. So you'll notice down here, we have just one single organism. So in this case, it's a deer. And then if you look to the next area, we have a population of deer. So at the bottom, we have just one organism, and then a group of those organisms actually make something called a population. So a group of more than one deer make a population of deer. Okay? And then in this next piece of the diagram, we have something called a community of different species. So a community is made up of a whole bunch of different populations. So you'll see here we have a wolf, we have a butterfly, we have birds, we have deer. So a community is a bunch or a group of different populations of organisms. So we have a population of deer, a population of birds. Okay, so now a community is made up of multiple different species or organisms. Okay, and then over here, we have this last piece of the diagram, and it says here an ecosystem of the community and its abiotic factors. So an ecosystem, remember, is made up of both abiotic and biotic factors. So we have different living things, okay? We have different populations, different organisms, an owl, wolf, deer, and then we also see the non-living components, the abiotic components here as well. So we have water, rocks, okay? These are the non-living things that the living things depend on for survival. Okay, so just again, a quick review. We start with a single organism. A population is more than one of a specific species, so a population of deer. And then a community is multiple populations of different species, and then an ecosystem is both living and non-living things interacting. Okay, and then this diagram here is just reiterating the same thing. So we have an organism, which will be a specific species, a specific organism. So in the last slide we saw the organism be the deer, so a specific species or group of deer. And then when there's more than one of them, that makes up a population. Okay, and then we have a habitat, the area or the part of the environment that that population lives in. Okay, and then we have a community. So again, that is more than one population or more than one different type of species. Okay, and then we have the ecosystem. So again, multiple different populations making up a community, but then also including the abiotic non-living components. So the interaction between the living and the non-living within an environment makes up an ecosystem. Okay, so that's why we have biotic and abiotic here. Okay, and there's a little bit of homework. There's a worksheet to go with this lesson. Okay, and that's that. First lesson of ecology, sustainable ecosystems.